Welcome everyone, I am Aldo Liga, I work at ISPI. I have the great pleasure to moderate today this conversation on the challenges and opportunities of energy transition in the Gulf region. As you know, Gulf countries have identified in the energy transition a key pillar to diversifying their economies, have set very ambitious targets in terms of renewable energy projects and carbon neutrality, and have made significant investments at both domestic and international level. But at the same time, a broad set of challenges persist, ranging from the fact that dependence on hydrocarbons is still very high, to the vulnerability to climate change and the threats of regional instability. So a lot of dimensions to be understood. Today we have the great opportunity to discuss all these dynamics with Marco Arcelli, CEO of ACWA Power, Marco Piredda, Senior Vice President and Head of International Affairs Analysis and Business Support at ENI, and then with Carole Nakhle, President of the Arab Energy Club and founder and CEO of Crystol Energy. So thanks for being with us today and welcome again. Let's start our discussion. We will have around half an hour. We will first focus on the state of the energy transition in the Gulf. Then we will talk about technologies, innovations and resources. And we'll conclude this conversation discussing the link between energy transitions and foreign policy. So our first question for Carole Nakhle. How have recent geopolitical shifts that we have watched so far shaped pathways towards the energy transition in Gulf countries? I'm thinking of the war in Gaza, the Red Sea crisis, and the coming back to the White House of Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question, but I don't know if I'm going to give it justice in a few minutes. However, I'm thinking about what has changed. Actually, a lot has changed, and that will impact the energy transition, because energy transition today depends a lot on policies in place. So if you look at all the outlooks that are being published by the IEA and other established organizations, you find that their main assumptions are around policies. And when policies change, the outlook for those publications also changes. So we are definitely seeing policy changes, and that will have some spillovers on the energy transition. But let me look at it from a different perspective, because we're focusing on the Middle East. Actually, the main lessons I have particularly learned from the geopolitical developments that have been happening since 2022, so not only last year or with the arrival of Donald Trump to the White House earlier this year. We had massive geopolitical developments in Europe with the war in Ukraine. We had war in the Middle East, in Gaza, and still ongoing. We had Israel and Iran attacking each other directly for the first time in recent history. So lots of these developments, and then you have sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Venezuela, Libya still up and down on a roller coaster. So all these geopolitical crises and cocktail of crises, and oil prices are where they are today. Yes, we had some spikes, but they corrected very quickly, and you went back to very low price levels. So today, for example, at $70 a barrel or $71 a barrel, we are at 3-year low. So the main lesson here that one can identify is that we have come a long way from the 70s. So imagine if you were maybe 20 or 10 years ago and you had all these geopolitical developments, you would have seen prices spiking, staying perhaps in the 3-digit territory for much longer. But today we don't have that. Our energy system and global economies have become much more resilient to the geopolitical shocks that used to destabilize global oil markets. And that has improved energy security, despite what many people still complain about. So if we look at it from this perspective, there is here a warning sign to the oil and gas producers that we are accelerating more towards reducing the power and the influence that oil can have on the global economy. Now, at the moment, things seem to be still fine because the market is still growing. Demand is still growing, not at a huge rate, but it is still growing. And the US, yes, Trump is pro-oil industry, and that provided a confidence boost to the industry all around the world, but particularly to Middle East producers. But Trump and the US are tough competitors. And this is where I'm going to wrap my answer and say that in the future, we don't know when that will happen, but doesn't seem too far from now, especially when you look at oil and gas projects, which are by their own nature long-term. that the market will change fundamentally. Instead of growing, the market will stall and at some point will start to shrink. And the dynamics of competition in a shrinking market are very different from those in a growing market. Competition will be tougher, and those that are the low-cost producers and those with the low carbon intensity will be the last to leave the market. But the condition that needs to be met is that they should also have well-diversified economies to face that challenge. And I'll be happy to elaborate more on that later on.
Thank you. Carole, you talk about diversification. Energy transition is at the center of visions for diversification of Gulf countries, so the Vision 2030 and the other national visions of other countries. So a question for Marco Arcelli: how are GCC countries working on energy transition, and what are the main challenges ahead?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's really, I think today, one of the beacon in the world, the GCC, and in particularly Saudi Arabia, when we come to energy transition and decarbonization. The program in Saudi Arabia is to move from basically 100% oil-fired power generation a few years ago to a balance 50-50 of renewables and gas-fired by 2030. And to give you an idea of the speed of execution, we already have, in just 3-4 years, we have started the program, 3 gigawatt in operation, 17 gigawatt under construction, and we just signed contracts to build another 12 gigawatt, and soon, in the next few weeks, another 3 gigawatts. So pretty soon, we will have 30 gigawatt of renewable solar and wind under construction in Saudi Arabia. That is almost twice as much as the total of Germany, Italy, and France combined in a single year. So that gives you an idea of the scale and the speed of what's going on here. Overall, it's a program that will take out 278 million tons of greenhouse gases from emissions by 2030, which is roughly equivalent to 2/3 of the total emission of Italy, just to put it in perspective, and all these by 2030. So the scale, the speed is massive, and it affects also the rest of the GCC. So the Emirates, Oman, all have similar programs. So despite the fact that we enjoy, of course, very cheap and let me say abundant reserves here of hydrocarbons, it is clear the direction is going in that the world is moving in that direction. By the way, that offers also a great opportunity to build an energy bridge between Saudi Arabia and Europe, both on green hydrogen and power exports, because the energy that we produce here costs 1/5 or 1/6 of what it costs to produce in Europe. So that is what we are now starting to look at increasingly more, to see if we can bring this wealth also to Europe, to contribute not only to decarbonization, but security of supply, because this will shift gas demand away from, will lower gas demand, and will also contribute to the preserving of the industrial capacity in Europe, because we will be bringing energy that is potentially 30-40% cheaper than you can produce today locally.
Thank you, Marco Arcelli. Marco Pireda, we are all impressed by the ambitions of Gulf countries in terms of green transitions. At the same time, these countries are, let's say, lagging behind in terms of energy efficiency, but also in terms of climate change adaptation efforts. If I'm not wrong, Kuwait is the only country in the region which has submitted a national adaptation plan to the United Nations. So, in your opinion, what are the main challenges in this regard?
Thank you, Aldo. Thank you for the question. And let me say that I would not agree on the fact that all the Gulf countries are lagging behind in terms of climate targets. And also in terms of climate programs and implementation of the programs. As you were mentioning, the NDCs, actually the United Emirates is the first to have introduced the first country to have introduced the new national determined goal for 2025. But this is just an example. What I would like to underline is that the Gulf is a varied, diversified region We're not talking only about countries enjoying huge oil and gas revenues for a relatively small population. We have also countries such as, for example, Iraq, with more than 40,000 million people of population, and with a carbon intensity that is much lower than the intensity of Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. So we need to diversify the conditions that we find in the region. My reading is that there are countries such as, for example, Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates that are implementing a very huge policies with huge finances to transform their economy. So they are going to meet the goals, if not exactly as planned, but really doing something tangible. And they can do it implementing new technologies. Green hydrogen was mentioned, but there are also other solutions, for example, CCS, or the combination of green energies with artificial intelligence. There is a lot of things to do, and I don't think none of these countries can, let's say, disengage vis-a-vis the climate change. It is true that the overall environment, including the approach of the Trump administration, has radically changed. Nevertheless, I think that the incentives will not come only from the policies or from the orientation of some big political players, but also by market opportunities. And one thing that I see in the Gulf is that many companies with up-to-date technologies have understood that the transition is also a huge market opportunity. And in this respect, policies allowing, I think that this will be the key for enlarging the solutions and also for cooperation between the players in the region and the players in Europe and in Asia.
Thank you, Marco Piredda. So let's move to discuss the resources of the energy transition, as already mentioned by previous answers. So, Carole, critical raw materials are key for the transition, and major countries are competing to secure their own supplies. So how are Gulf countries positioned in this dynamic of global competition, and are there any differences in terms of approaches on this regard, the approaches, for example, of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates on critical raw materials?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight, just to build on what Marco said earlier, that we have to recognize that even though we talk about Middle East or MENA or Gulf countries, this is quite divergent regions, because if you look at each country individually, they have different profiles, a different level of economic diversification, different levels of cost of production, you name it. So it's very important that when we are talking about the region, we appreciate the differences between the different countries. In relation to your question, that is exactly one point I want to highlight, because let me start from the end. The last part of your question, the different approaches, I would say it depends on the resources that a country is sitting on. So, for example, Saudi Arabia is, yes, oil rich, and also, by the way, gas rich, conventional and unconventional, but is also mineral rich, and they have been producing some minerals, and they want to expand the exploration of other minerals. Now we've seen some numbers, but yes, they can be quite substantial, but we are still in some areas at the exploration stage. I want to see the appetite of international investors, because it's a different animal. Like when you talk about mining and oil and gas, yes, we put them together, extractive industry, but it's not necessarily the same methods of extraction or the same production profile, and not also the same economic outcome. So you have much more value with oil and gas than you have with mining. Still, so a country like Saudi Saudi Arabia will be focusing a lot on exploring their domestic resources. Qatar is gas rich, and for Qatar, they believe that gas is a transition fuel or is a bridge fuel, whatever you want to perceive it, but they see as gas playing a much longer role in the energy transition. The UAE, for example, has some resources domestically, but we see them quite more aggressive than other countries in the region in terms of international investments, particularly in African countries, which are minerals and metals rich. So this is just to give you an overview about the divergent perspectives. But if we're to generalize the issue of energy transition and minerals and metals, we all know that the energy transition is going to be and is already minerals and metals intensive, and that would translate into a significant increase in the demands for those natural resources. Now, you're not talking about 1% or 2%. I've seen some studies where we're talking about, for some metals or minerals, we're talking about almost 1,000% if we were to achieve the desirable target by 2045 or 2050. And that is a massive transformation. Now, if you are a player already in that field, you would like to ride that wave because you want to be in that business not for a year or two. You want to be there for as long as possible. And this is where we're seeing the Gulf countries are trying to seize on that opportunity to be part of the picture for the long term. But there is also another aspect to this story. So not only to encourage domestic exploitation of the resources. One of the things I've been focusing on is growth in resource nationalism, whereby when a commodity becomes more strategically important and the market grows and the demand for it increases, and with metals and minerals, we have a much greater concentration of the resources, of the processing facilities, of the production, and we have much bigger concentration than we have with oil and gas. And therefore, the risk of resource nationalism increases. And resource nationalism, just for those who are listening, does not necessarily mean nationalizing the industry. That is one extreme manifestation of the resource nationalism. It can take any kind of form whereby the host government increases its presence and its stake in the investment. So if you are, let's say, a first mover into a country and you build a relationship with a government in that country, then you tend to have a much lower risk exposure if you were a later comer to the industry. But anyway, it has too many complicated facets. So that's another aspect where we see that the Gulf countries, especially the UAE, is investing in some African countries, not just in terms of the energy resource that is part of it, but also in other industries, building this kind of long-term relationship that can last them for many years to come. And that by itself can also support their own quest for energy security in a greener, cleaner world.
Thank you, Carole. Marco Piredda, what are, in your view, the most promising innovations and the technologies to advance decarbonization efforts, and what are the most suitable solutions for Gulf energy transitions? Maybe you are mute?
I'm not. I don't think. At least not on my side.
Okay, so thank you. Sorry.
No, I was saying no fit for all solutions. I mean, we need again to diversify and to be a little bit analytic. But in our strategies, we are focusing the transition solutions with green or low carbon solutions, combining CCS for the hard-to-abate industry. We are insisting on a biofuel for the revolution of transports, but also we are investing in a much promising forward-looking technology solution as it is nuclear fusion, just to name some examples. Focusing on the area, on the region, in the Gulf, we see that different countries have, let's say, promoted different solutions. For example, we have already a nuclear power as it is the UAE, covering in the future much of the electricity production in the country, so able to diversify and free other resources. But we have also countries insisting, and Saudi Arabia is one of them, in the hydrogen and the rest to hydrogen solutions, so renewable to hydrogen. Here we have on the one side, we have a huge potential all over the region with the countries that have a mature, effective, efficient governance already, let's say, plug in to offer low-cost energy for clients either in Asia or in Africa. Or in Europe, Africa as well. But on the other side, we have a list of challenges that need to be solved if we want to, let's say, develop this complementarity between the green energies produced in the Gulf and demand that will be raising in Europe, for example. One of the challenges regards the regulation of the policies. For example, how do we consider the hydrogen to ammonia solution to be imported to Europe? This is not fully green because there is some carbon footprint. And in Europe, we have not decided yet what kind of certification we attach to these products. This is just an example. Then there is all the infrastructure issue and the transport issue. So I think that in one sentence, there is a huge potential to have, let's say, overcapacity to produce green energies as it is for conventional energies today. So the area is exporting oil and gas, but there are also a number of conditions to be fulfilled in order to allow for this potential to be developed, to be implemented.
Thank you very much. Marco Arcelli, we have talked a lot of green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage in the region, but at the same time, there are a lot of technical and economic questions related to the feasibility of these projects. What do you think about possible future developments in these two fields?
So we are probably the leader in green hydrogen in the world. We have invested more than $5 billion to date in the NEOM Green Hydrogen project and a second project in Uzbekistan. One has an offtake by Air Products for
Maybe there are some.
Someone has a local petro. Can you see me? Can you see me?
Now, yes, but if you can repeat from the beginning, because we had some troubles in understanding you.
Okay, sorry about that. Now, I was saying that ACWA Power is today probably the leader in the world in green hydrogen. We have invested more than $5 billion in a project in Saudi Arabia called NEOM Green Hydrogen with Air Products and NEOM. Air Products is the off-taker and is selling that to European customers like Total Energy for refineries and so on. And the second project is in Uzbekistan, where the off-taker is the local petrochemical and fertilizer companies. We are a strong believer in the technology, and I will say that people compare it with green hydrogen, but it's I think not a very precise comparison when it comes to cost, because the cost of grey hydrogen is volatile. It's driven by the cost of gas, by a commodity, whereas the cost of green hydrogen is flat. Once you invest, it's the same for the next 25 to 30 years. And in fact, it's even declining a little bit. You can profile it so that over time it decreases. So to give an example, today, the hydrogen that we can produce in Saudi Arabia is cheaper. The green hydrogen is cheaper than the gray hydrogen that can be produced in Europe, given the high gas prices. Then, of course, tomorrow the market will change or could change. Then, of course, maybe the dynamics will be different. But that to say that today we see customers that are willing. Hello?
Yes.
Can you see me? Yes.
Now, yes.
To get the supply and stability of prices over the long term. So sorry, yes, I'm heading to the airport, so that's why connection is not very stable. Apologize for that. So that's why we are a firm believer that more projects will be developed. In fact, we're looking at developing another couple of projects within the next year in Saudi Arabia, and we're talking to a number of European customers for that. as well as the power experts, as also Marco was mentioning. I think that, of course, linking two regions with long cable, power cable, of course, it's something that will require many years, but I think that we can achieve the same results also on that technology.
Thank you, Marco. So let's conclude this conversation with a final round of questions on the link between energy transition and foreign policy of Gulf countries. Carole, to conclude, what is the role of energy transitions within the foreign policy and soft power of GCC countries?
Look, if you appreciate the fact that energy enters into every single aspect of our modern life and modern society, then you would appreciate the influence that energy can play when it comes to international affairs, geopolitics, and soft power. And the Middle East, their main strength is actually energy. I mean, look how they gained this international presence and influence, first with oil, then with gas, and now we're talking about green energy. Though I have to say that one issue I have with investment in green energy in the Middle East and elsewhere in major oil and gas producing countries is that whether we like it or not, it's not about cost, it's about economic rent. And the renewable energy will not generate the same economic rent for those producers as you have with oil and gas. So they will still hold on tight to their oil and gas. They will still produce perhaps the last possible molecule, but they have to reduce the carbon footprint of their oil and gas production. I think that would play a more important role in the energy transition because they do have the advantage of low cost of production. So for me, this is where they will have a bigger influence on soft power and a global affair than it is with green energy.
Thank you, Carole. Marco Arcelli, over the past years, we have seen a lot of Gulf energy companies investing in Africa, in other regions of the Middle East, on renewable energy projects. So, in your opinion, what are the countries, the regions, but also the markets and the sectors most promising in terms of new investments?
ACWA Power invests about $20 billion a year in energy transition, renewables, green hydrogen, combined cycles, and also desalination. Of these 20 billions, about 60% go to Saudi Arabia. The rest we invest in Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and we now just entered China. So we look at these markets where we can make a difference. Europe, North America are great markets, great opportunities, but there are great local players, whereas we want to focus on where we can make an impact to support the local economic activity. And because we have the scale on the supply chain by this $20 billion investment every year with solar panel manufacturer, EPC contractors, wind turbines, battery storage, and so on, we can really bring the most efficient solution to these countries. We couple it with great financial structuring.
I think that
for every $1 that we invest, we mobilize 10. So that is why we think that we can make a real big impact and have a stabilizing impact in these countries. Today, we're probably the biggest investor in Africa with almost $10 billion invested in renewable energy, $15 billion in Central Asia. So these are growth markets where we can demonstrate that we can turn Saudi Arabia from being the largest exporter of oil to the largest exporter of low carbon technology and desalination.
Marco, so to conclude with Marco Piredda, do you see the possibility of Gulf emerging as a renewable energy hub to export green electricity and green hydrogen? There are a lot of projects which aims at improving transmissions lines among countries in the regions and even until the Eastern Mediterranean region, the building of transnational interconnections. What do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you. Let's say that the concept of hub is a little bit overused and returns in different regions. But yes, I see the possibility of a number of hubs because there is also strong inner competition between Gulf players. So I don't see one single, let's say, player being a hub for those technologies. Nevertheless, there are, yes, so many developments, also recent developments in the geopolitical framework. Just to name a few, a different situation in Syria, the perspective of this India, Middle East, Europe corridor, involving so many actors that would also possibly involve energy cooperation. Some infrastructural projects in the Med and in the region to connect and transport electrons. Let's say that if up to now the connections between the area, the Gulf and Europe has been mainly via sea ship connections with a limited infrastructural or on the ground connections, there might be opportunity to diversify this picture. Nevertheless, the main challenge, the main question mark, let's say, overarching this situation is the perspectives of a stable demand in the markets of destination. This is, I would say, the main point that is, for the time being, not triggering enough volume of investments, but this might change in the future if we don't, let's say, overcome the situation of, let's say, uncertainty in terms of European policies, international targets, but also level of interdependence in the energy market, technologies that are lowering the costs, but still not sufficiently mature. All these will, in the end, give the answer on the possibility to have these, say, increased flows of energy, either electrons or molecules from the Gulf to the Med, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So we hope having contributed to decrypt this very complex context. So thank you very much to our distinguished speakers. Thank you to Marco Arcelli, to Marco Piredda and Carole Nakhle. Thanks to the audience and see you soon.